Good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to this second session of this theme, number 2, which is about soil carbon monitoring, reporting and verification. Scientific basis for public and private incentives. My name is Jari Liski. I'm from the Finnish Meteorological Institute. I work as a chief scientist there, and I'm chairing this afternoon session, like I chaired also the morning session. For those of you who were not there in the morning session, I would like to briefly summarize what happened there. So in the morning session, we had 3 presentations. First, Pete Smith from the University of Aberdeen gave a overall talk of what the current measurement, reporting and verification system for soil carbon changes are, and then what is the kind of the vision for their future development. And after this kind of overall presentation of presenting the overall framework, we heard 3 examples of MRV systems. One of them was given by Jagadesh Jaluripati, from a senior scientist from the James Hutton Institute in Scotland. And then we heard Jean-François Soussan, who's the vice president on international policy matters in INRA in France. And then Istem Fer from Finnish Meteorological Institute gave a speech on the system that we are developing at Finnish Meteorological Institute. And now the idea of this afternoon session on the same theme is that we would now have the possibility to hear comments on the status of the development of this measurement, reporting and verification systems from different stakeholders. And we will have a really nice and diverse range of stakeholders looking at this topic from different perspectives. So this will be really interesting to hear what these 6 persons will have to say about this. And yeah, it will be 10 minutes for the presentation, and then after that we will have 5 minutes for discussions. And then I emphasize also the speakers that we have to be quite strict on time. We have 6 presentations. If we're running late, then we will have the last speaker will not have the same chance of giving his or her thoughts. Okay, so we'll start with the presentation by Werner Kutsch, who is the Director General of Integrated Carbon Observation System, ICOS. And Werner will tell us how ICOS is responding to the needs of MRV systems. And yeah, of course, ICOS is a very, how would I say, central stakeholder in quantifying greenhouse gases, and in this case, especially carbon and carbon dioxide. So I'm very excited to hear the ICOS perspective. So welcome, Werner, and the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much, and thank you for having me here and giving the opportunity to present ICOS. What I like in this conference is that people were also giving personal perspectives and perhaps a little bit about me. My family, as long as I can track them back, were living on a farm. Until my grandfather was born second son, and so he did not inherit the farm and had to make his own ways. So I am born as a city boy, but I became a scientist, and with that, as a scientist, I went into ecology, and among others, I co-edited this book on soil carbon dynamics 10 years ago. So I have a little bit of background on the topic. Now I am a science manager. I'm managing the Integrated Carbon Observation System, which is a research infrastructure, a European research infrastructure. And to answer the question, how is ICOS responding to the needs of the MRV system? The easiest answer is we are providing measurements. And we are providing a specific type of measurements, and we are doing this since many years. The first, even pre-ICOS publication on cropland fluxes was coming out of a project called Carbo Europe. And there are some of the co-authors even sitting in the room, and Pete Smith was also co-author of this special issue. And we are measuring the so-called eddy covariance fluxes. I will explain this a bit more in detail. Before I do this, This is the ICOS network. ICOS is having 3 types of stations of observations: ecosystem observation, that are the green dots. Red dots are atmospheric observations. So there we are measuring the concentration of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere. And then you see blue lines and blue dots, that's our ocean stations, where we provide data from which you can calculate the fluxes from the atmosphere into the ocean. So as I said, it's a distributed European research infrastructure. Currently 16 countries are cooperating there. We are looking back to more than 100 million euros investment. We have 160 stations currently. We have central hubs that are really taking care that the data are standardized, the measurements are standardized, but also the data and the calibration gases and so on are highly standardized. Before I go more into details, I would like to talk a little bit about difficulties and threats. And the first difficulty is measuring and verifying the real impact of any measure is difficult because the delta C in soils, the change of carbon in soils, is a small number in a big pool, and that's always difficult to measure. The second problem is that these changes are slow. So if you want to relate a change to a single measure in 1 year, you can't do that. You need long times if you do repeated stock taking. And the long-term stability of the sequestered carbon is in a way unclear or unsure. For example, after 10 years of regenerative farming, the farmer may say, okay, now I'm going back to the old management, and then the carbon is lost again, or we might have an impact of climate change. We have unclear methods and verification, and this is of course inviting greenwashing. Somebody can just say, I give you a certificate and we are selling carbon that in fact is hot air, and I think this is a threat for the voluntary carbon market. And we really need these clear methods and the clear verification. So what can ICOS do? Before I tell exactly what we are measuring, I would give a bit of an integration or an introduction what we are measuring or where we are measuring. Are we measuring 1 square meter of a cropland? Are we measuring a whole field? Or are we measuring a farming system? And I think this is quite important. So let's say we have a cropland, a grassland, and then we have the farm, and we have, of course, machinery that's working on the cropland, also on the grassland, and we have, in this case, cows which are either on the grassland or at the farm, and then we have the whole other food sector behind it. This is processing, this is transport, this is storage, distribution, and consumption. And this part of the food sector is not in the official emission accounting for agriculture. I think that's also important to keep in mind, that a lot of the food sector emissions are not reported in the agricultural sector. So if we look at the interaction between this farm and the other food sector and the atmosphere, we have a lot of CO2 fluxes. We have the GPP, that's the photosynthetic uptake of the plants, and we have the total ecosystem respiration, and this is the release of CO2 by the ecosystem by respiration. So this factor, NEE, is the CO2 budget of a cropland. But then you have also animal respiration of the farm, you have fuel from the machinery, you have heating, electricity, so you have a lot of additional CO2 fluxes, which we are usually not directly measuring. In addition, you have methane coming from the cows, from the manure, from rice, possibly, and you have nitrous oxide, which is coming from the soils, and it's increased by excess nitrogen fertilization. So if you're measuring the fluxes, only the gaseous fluxes between the atmosphere and the ecosystem or the farming system, you have already a lot to do. In numbers, This is the current emissions reported by the EU. I think it's 20 and 21. So we have these N2O emissions, we have the methane emissions and other emissions reported in the agricultural sector. And then we have a second basket of reports in the inventories. That's the land use and land use change and forestry. And the part related to the agriculture is here, mainly the CO2 fluxes. And this is also positive, and it's balanced by the big forest sinks. So I think we have to keep this in mind if we go to more detailed questions. So at the moment, we are forgetting the methane and the O fluxes, and we are only looking at the carbon fluxes. And there is a second part of the story, and that is the meta fluxes. So there is harvest from the cropland to the farm, and then of course to the other food sector. But there might also be manure that is given to the soils. There are crop residues and soils and roots that are given into the soil. There are meat and dairy products that are taken from the grassland potentially to the farm and then to the food sector. And of course, there's also plant biomass that is taken. So now we are going to a simplified look at one cropland. And when we can say we measure the vertical fluxes, the fluxes between this cropland and the atmosphere, this is the NEE. But we can also monitor what is the farmer bringing to this field. That's a horizontal flux, and what's taken from the field. And this balance gives us a new number, and that's called the net biome production. And this is an example of a long-term measurement from an ICO station. And you see in green the NEE. That's the uptake of this farm over these 20 years from the atmosphere. It's the balance between the photosynthetic uptake and the respirational release. So if you only look at the interface between this cropland and the atmosphere, you can see that it's taking up and taking up and taking up net carbon. But when you add now the fluxes, the lateral fluxes, the horizontal fluxes, you have a lot of carbon that is taken away by the harvest. And then you, with all these single events, you come to a net loss of carbon from the perspective of this cropland. And where is this lost? It's lost from the soil. It's soil organic matter that is respired, mineralized, but it's not replaced because the harvest is taken away from the forest. So how can we use these data in a let's say more integrated system? I forgot something. We made a classical repeated stocktake after 10 years at this site. We did not confirm this loss of carbon. But the problem is there were different labs, different methods, different parts of the site that was doing this. And you see the large uncertainty of this. And I think this is a problem that we have to solve. We have other sites in Switzerland and France where the result was much better, and the losses were also confirmed by the repeated stocktake. I'm showing this because we need to do more research to get these different methods together. Now, I think this is my last slide already. When we want to integrate this, we need different spheres. And all these spheres, luckily, are coming here together, but they should work together in the future. So we have the sphere of science, we have observations, experiments, and we have models, and we have a lot of knowledge in this sphere. And this sphere should be used and transferred to the sphere of practice. And this means, I think, that we all should have the scientific knowledge in coming from something that is a process from good practice guidelines to better practice guidelines better practice guidelines means guidelines for regenerative carbon storing energy. And then we should go with this to the real sphere of practice, which means to the farmers. And when we are talking about incentives and systems to bring this into practice, then we should have, this is an incentive, we should just have a small incentive for farmers who apply these better guidelines. But then we should perhaps have more incentives for farmers, that's a smaller number, who do the verification, and even more who put observations on their farm. And with this verification and observation, we have a lot of new data getting into the scientific system, and we can have a cycle that is integrating this. And that's our response, our suggestion. ICOS is there for having a lot of these data, and we're happy to contribute to this.
Thank you very much, Werner, for this for your presentation. And I think it's because during the morning sessions we had quite a few examples of how this flux data is used already in this existing modeling, reporting, and verification systems. And it was now very nice to see the perspective, how you look at that same thing from the ICOS perspective. So we are running a little bit late, but since we are here for this matter and the topic, so let's, if somebody has like an immediate question now, so we can take one question here. Let's see. There will be a possibility to also to, like, if you something comes into your mind, that we will bring the kind of the messages from each of these parallel sessions to the panel discussion, which will be later this afternoon, so that there will be a chance also to participate in the discussion then. But once again, Werner, thank you very much for this ICOS perspective. And I want to repeat that the systems like ICOS, which take like a standardized quality control measurements, are an essential component of anything like a measurement, reporting, and verification system. Thanks, Werner. Indeed. Thank you. So we'll move on to the second presentation, and we're indeed very happy and we're very proud to have Christian Holzleitner giving the second comment here. He's the head of unit from Directorate General for Climate Action from the EU Commission. So, and we will hear about EU Commission's carbon removal certification scheme, which is certainly like a very, very important, how do I say, a process in this field. So, Christian, the floor is yours.
Thanks so much. Yeah, very happy to talk again. Maybe some of you heard my general pitch yesterday on why we need more soil carbon and better management of it, because to become climate neutral in 2050, we need more storage of carbon, be it geologically, be it in forests, be it in soils, be it in products. So, we estimate to have like 400, 500 million tons of emissions still in the system in 2050. So we need an equal amount of removals. And as just you showed before, we are currently in the LULUCF sector at around removals of 240, 250 million tons. So we need to double that. And that's a massive amount. And for that, we need every kind of storage, and we must get better at permanent storage, carbon farming, the products. I've already said that. And now focusing more on carbon farming, as I also said yesterday. The idea is for every additional stored ton of carbon, you get maybe 50, 100, 150 tons of carbon. And what will be essential that this market, that these financial incentives can work, is of course that you have a credible monitoring, reporting, and verification system. And then you can think about different financial incentives, be it from the common agricultural policy, be it from state aid, be it from the ones who buy the products from the farmers, so the big food processors like the Nestle's, Danone's of our world, or maybe that's more for nature restoration and so on. You sell to a third party who then want to make a climate neutrality claim. But irrespective of whatever you do, it must be credible. Because the risk of greenwashing, the risk that you get a big shitstorm that is a very high risk and a big threat to this type of business. So, as I don't have a lot of time, I want to quickly move into describing in more detail what our carbon removal certification framework is about. So the proposal that we are currently having, we are discussing with member states, we are discussing with European Parliament. So the basic idea is we want to say in a credible way how much carbon is stored for how long and how sustainably is it done. And it's a voluntary framework and it's in Europe. So it's not worldwide, it's not global, it is for checking what happens in Europe. We start in the framework from 4 quality criteria, which are quite general if you talk about removals. You want to have a credible quantification, a reliable one, a conservative one, an accurate one. You want to have additionality, so you want to have more removals in the end. You want that they are kept, that the storage for as long as possible. Of course, there are different time frames. For geological storage, you can easily think about several centuries. For carbon farming forests, there's a much higher risk of a re-release, so you must deal with that. But nevertheless, you should also do your best to store the carbon as long as possible. And then you want that it's done sustainably. Certain minimum requirements on biodiversity, but also the co-benefits, so that you can show what you do for biodiversity, for water, the additional reductions of fertilizer emissions, for example. And this will increase the value of your certificates. So based on these principles, we want the Commission, together with an expert group, we want to develop the methodologies. So how can you, like for rewetting of peatlands, for agroforestry, for mineral salts, we want to develop one methodology. We won't develop all of them at once. We want to start probably with the ones who have the highest potential for climate and biodiversity. So my favorite examples are always agroforestry, rewetting of peatlands. We'll look at what is out there, what are the existing methodologies, but then we will come up with one methodology. And I think and that's, for me, essential is to create this transparency and clarity, because now you have so many different methodologies around there, and that's not good to increase the trust in this. So this is what we want to deliver. Based on that methodology, once we agreed with that, together with the expert group, then the certification can start. And there, I think the important elements is that we have third-party verification and that we have a registry. So to avoid double counting and be very clear what happens to these certificates. There we build a lot on the experience what we have from the certification of sustainable energy, of biofuels under the Renewables Directive. A lot on what we understand from the certification of organic farming. And we would hope that the guys that are already doing this type of certification will also be ready to take on the certification of carbon removals, so that we don't create a lot of additional administrative burden. And I think what is also important to understand is that it will be mostly group of farmers that will join that. There will be always one guy who gets together more farmers on that, like a cooperative and so on. So you can also build there, I think, a lot on existing structures. And then, importantly, in the second step, of course, from where does the money come from? Someone needs to finance that. So what we are doing is very much on the supply side. We want to create the credibility, as I said, how much carbon is stored for how long, how sustainably. And then there are several options how you can finance those additional carbon storage. So there's the whole idea of voluntary financing, this voluntary carbon market that is out there. It's a bit of a wild west. But the European Commission, we have other proposals and already legislation that should address that and should bring more clarity on how one can use those credits. The first one is a proposal from March 23, which is called Green Claims. So there, we will say exactly how can you make claims about climate neutrality. To which extent can you offset emissions, scope 3, scope 1, scope 2, and all of that will be decided there. And then there will be references to our certificates. The other important piece of legislation, which is already in force, is the corporate sustainability reporting. There will be detailed rules how companies can report their carbon balance and also how to use carbon credits. So our colleagues from the Director General for Financial Markets will come out in the next weeks with a proposal for what we call Delegated Act, exactly on a standard how this climate accounting should work for European companies, and to which extent they can use carbon credits, carbon removals here to make climate neutrality claims. And then, of course, we would hope that our certificates can also be helpful for voluntary public financing through state aid, or we see that in particular those member states that have large challenges, for example, with peatlands, with drained peatlands like Denmark, like Ireland, they use a lot of money also outside the common agricultural policy to finance measures there. And then, probably what is even more interesting is the perspective of European policies after 2030. Or we have a climate target for 2030 of 55%. Now we are discussing what should be our target for 2040. And will there be like separate targets for carbon removals? What we have to store in our soils, in our forests. And as I said before, given the size that we need, like the doubling of our current removals possibly, it's about, okay, should we also use like our compliance markets for that, like the emission trading system? So should we integrate carbon removals in our emission trading system? Then also in LULUCF, which is currently a system at the level of member states, should we also give incentives at the individual level of farmers and foresters? So to create a trade, maybe between the big food processing companies and farmers, to create those financial incentives in such a scale that we can reach our climate neutrality targets. But irrespective of what you think, and you can have a lot of discussions on that, how it should be financed. And there are very divided views. Should you use public money, the common agricultural policy? Should you use private solutions? That will also be coming up in the next years. But the groundwork needs to be a very reliable certification, quantification of carbon removals, of the storage of carbon in the soils. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Christian. That's really interesting indeed. And then I think one of the things that's especially interesting is that your aim at this one methodology, like you said, and how the scientific community developing various methodologies, how will then contribute to that process, and how the one methodology will be then tested, the validity. I mean, that's one of the aspects that I think I will bring to as a kind of a message from this theme to the overall discussion. But we have time for one or two questions now. Here first and from there second. So we only have the one microphone, so that's a bit uncomfortable, but I hope that's okay.
Yeah, hi, Eric Tchichiev, senior scientist at INRAE in France. You said that you would choose one methodology for MRV. Do you mean that you will use only one like model or one tool, or like a framework, a methodological framework that will be unified? Because this is very different.
So when I said I meant in the first place per activity. So one methodology for rewetting of peatlands, one methodology for agroforestry. So not a global one or a very generic one. Then the rest, as you say, if we go into more details, and then I forgot my last slide. There is where we really like your input. So and we have the next meeting of our expert group on 21st and 22nd of June. And in preparation of that, we did a call on existing methodologies. And we got more than 140 submissions. And this is what we will be discussing there. So we'll be web streamed, we'll be online. And and of course, as I also said yesterday, I would be so happy if we get from you already the written methodologies. The more input we can get, we discussed that at the expert group. There will be NGOs who will be super critical on all of this. But the sooner we can identify with what we can start, the better. And it's completely clear to me that this will be a process, like all the potential that we have from earth observation, soil sampling, whatever. I would hope that the methodologies that we have in 5 or 10 years will look completely different from what we can do now. But what is a credible methodology that we can start now? So this is my key question.
Yeah, let's take another question. That was him over there.
Thank you very much. I'd like to declare I'm not British, but I'm going to be asking this question. Under the new CSRD reporting, Corporate Sustainable Reporting Directive, or non-EU businesses will have to report on their reduction, avoidance and removals as of 2024. So there is going to be a natural price increase in carbon, I suspect, by 2030. Governments are also collecting data from farms in the form of, for payments. I hate the word subsidies, but you know what I mean. So there's a natural data flow and potential financial flow coming from both ends. Now, you weren't very clear on the certifiers. Would the EU, or who would in the EU, my hand is up for the 4 per 1,000, being the the verifier for certifying of those credits in order to make that funding go? What do you think of that?
Yeah, thanks. Very good question. I haven't been explicit on that. So also here, we build a lot on the experience that we have from the certification of sustainable bioenergy. And there, you have two options. You can have private certification schemes that would be active across Europe, or you can have national certification schemes. And in carbon farming, you already have like some national schemes, like the Label Bas Carbone in France. You have the Spanish scheme. So, and we want to be open to all of them. But if this is successful, I would hope that we can get to European-wide certification schemes. And this is also what you see happening for the renewables, for sustainable bioenergy. So they have like one certification scheme per type of crop. And I would also there see, let's see how the market will work out. But I would rely to as much as possible on private guys who can do this, which is also like the way how we do it under the emission trading system for industry and power production.
Yeah, thank you very much. There's one question from online. We're running a little bit over time, but still this serves as like an excellent bridge to Niklas Kaskeala's presentation. So I think I would like to read that aloud, and if you don't mind, so if you can comment that. So the question goes, will the certificate that will be developed be the only one recognized on the carbon credit market?
It depends which carbon credit market you talk about. There's this wild west out there, which is called voluntary carbon market. And what one should never forget, what is out there is to a large extent, it's cheap renewable credits, it's avoided emission credits, where you talk maybe about prices of 5 or 10 euros. And what we're talking here about is all much more expensive. So, and if you do it well, I mean, rewetting of peatlands is something expensive. If you, I mean, you take away may take away a lot of business from the farmer. So you would talk about 100, 150 euros. So there are, I think, several companies that voluntarily invest into this. But I think in the longer term, we will need to look into compliance markets, and we definitely want that counts towards our targets. We have very ambitious climate targets with climate neutrality in 2050. So I don't think that Europe will finance the climate neutrality of Apple or Microsoft in the US. This will not be. This must be a scheme for Europe, for us, for our agriculture, for our farmers, to make a very credible claim that this is really sustainable agriculture.
Yeah, that's really interesting. So thanks once again, Christian. Thanks a lot for the presentation and the answers to these questions. Thanks a lot. Yeah, and the next comment will come from Compensate, and we will hear Niklas Kaskeala, Chief Impact Officer, exactly giving a carbon market company perspective. And maybe, Niklas, you're a better person than I am to introduce like your experience on this carbon credit markets and things like that. And I wonder if you want to address this question, the last question from online about the relationship of this carbon certification scheme to this carbon credit market. I don't know. But anyway, you're warmly welcome, and the floor is yours, Niklas.
Okay, thank you, Jari. Yeah, hello everyone, good afternoon. My name is Niklas Kaskeala. I'm the chairman of the Compensate Foundation, which is a Finnish foundation that works to reform what was just described as the wild, wild west of the voluntary carbon market. I definitely agree that it has a lot of greenwashing within it, some intentional, some perhaps unintentional. Lack of regulation is a big problem, but things are moving ahead. Just to give you an example of how critical the Compensate Foundation is towards current standards on the market is that we have evaluated almost 200 of the leading carbon projects in the nature-based scene, all certified by leading standards, and less than 70% have been passed our quality criteria. So that says a lot about current market standards and perhaps about our approach towards this carbon market. But I also want to paint a picture of like what is the potential of this voluntary carbon market in terms of what many of you are working on, and maybe not just concentrate on the pitfalls of that market, but more of what we have to do in order to make it actually work. Let's see if I can. So this is already, you know this, and this was already in the previous presentation, but carbon removals is something we desperately need. And we're going to need gigatons of carbon removals and on an annual basis in the near future already. But luckily, what's actually driving the kind of demand side for carbon removals right now are corporate climate commitments, especially net zero. And even considering like the sort of perhaps difficult financial times we're living in today, we're seeing that the amount of corporate net zero commitments is still going up. And I suspect that we're going to see like it's going to be a very rare occasion where you have a big corporate without a net zero commitment in the near future. And what net zero means is that you need to rely partially on carbon removals in order to achieve a corporate net zero target. There are other frameworks that are also other corporate climate targets that are driving the demand side for carbon credits at the moment. Net zero probably being the leading one, but there are others like climate neutrality, or then you have carbon neutrality, or then you have sort of specific industry, sort of semi-compliance markets like CORSIA for the aviation industry, etc. But net zero is, I think, really crucial because that focuses on carbon removals. And as mentioned, a lot of the supply side on the market today are these very, very, very low quality avoided emissions credits. So they can be based on renewable energy, for example. That is definitely doesn't need the support of carbon markets anymore. It's already the most competitive form of energy production in most places. A lot of the credits are based on very faulty projects that protect forests from deforestation, but establishing the true climate impact of those projects is extremely tricky. But they kind of flood the market today, and these avoided emissions credits make up over 90% of carbon credits available on the voluntary carbon market today, and removals are only less than 10%. So this definitely needs to grow because removals is what companies need to achieve net zero targets. For example, under the so-called Science-Based Targets Initiative, which is probably the leading framework for most corporates right now in terms of their climate ambition. The Science-Based Targets Initiative says that in order to reach net zero, you need to decarbonize by 90 to 95% by 2050. But then you remain with that 5 to 10% of so-called unabatable emissions. What do you do with that? You can neutralize them. They use the term neutralize them with carbon removals. They say that the carbon removals need to be very permanent. So that poses a challenge, I think, for the soil carbon sector. But we can see how that can be overcome. So on the kind of supply side, what we're seeing is that there's very little project development in terms of creating these removal credits. There have been an abundance of these avoidance credits on the market. Lead times with creating projects are actually quite long. But then again, on the demand side, what we have is these, like demand for removals is increasing day by day. And these two are not matching at the moment. So we can already see that there's more demand for high quality removals than there's supply. So that encourages market actors to start creating these projects that actually create these removal credits. But the policy scene is still a bit complex, and hopefully the EU will kind of show the way here. In terms of prices, it was already mentioned here that maybe rewetting peatlands would go for over 100 euros a ton. These are, I think, very credible market estimates of where carbon removal credits might be priced at in the near future already. Today's market prices for nature-based projects, removal credits, is usually between $20 and $30. So you can see a significant price increase expected in the next few years. And this has to do with that imbalance of supply and demand that we have at the moment. The entire market size, there are many projections about how big this thing can grow. Some of them are derived from the fact that we actually just need the market to grow, because consider the around 5 to 10 gigatons that we need to remove on an annual basis already a few decades from now. That's a massive amount of carbon. So we need a massive carbon market in actually to allow us to achieve those figures. But the market has grown significantly in the past. It was really small just a few years ago, about 300 million, the market value in 2019, 2020. 2 billion last year. I think this year we'll expect about similar levels of market size, because there's obviously an economic downturn at the moment. But there have been projections that the market size might reach 1 trillion in already a few decades. For example, Bloomberg released a study earlier this year that if the rules of the market are designed right, if we get the regulation right, if we focus on high quality removals, we could reach the 1 trillion point in terms of market value already by the end of 2037. So that's already 15 years from now. So now to the Wild Wild West and the greenwashing and all of that. It's really, today's market lacks a lot of transparency. There hasn't been really much pressure in terms of policies or regulation. A lot of the project developers that exist today have legacy projects that have been developed with very low standards, and they have difficulties perhaps today to kind of adjust to raising the bar. They have a lot of vested interest, obviously, in the projects and credits that they have created already before. Buyers are entering the market for the first time, many of them. So corporates looking to make that climate claim of carbon neutrality, perhaps, or net zero. They haven't bought carbon credits before. They don't know what to buy. They're easily fooled. They can go for okay, let's say Gold Standard or Verra is a stamp of approval. Those are the two leading certification standards in the voluntary market. But in reality, they're not a guarantee of quality. So you need to be careful. So greenwashing accusations from civil society, but also increasing media scrutiny is putting a much more pressure on the market. Then we have initiatives like the carbon removal certification. We have other initiatives that are looking at regulating the market. It's clear that standards are going to be higher. Buyers are going to be more sophisticated, demand for more quality. And what I see what will happen in the future, that even though it's a voluntary market, the pressure to take responsibility for your emissions will grow. That will mean that it will become more like an obligatory thing. So if we have the right to pollute, shouldn't we be obliged to clean up after ourselves? And that's, I think, a mindset change that might happen already in the future, in the near future. Greenwashing, this is very typical today. A lot of media attention on the market right now, even though it's quite small. But you see headlines in The Guardian, Bloomberg on a weekly basis, big companies being accused or sued for greenwashing. Delta Airlines is right now being sued in the US for faulty climate neutrality claims, for example. So a real risk. Now, it's a complex market, and there are so many initiatives trying to reform the market and regulate the market. I'm not going to go through all of them, but it's good to understand that these initiatives are happening on a local level. For example, in Finland, we have a good guide from the Ministry of Environment and the Ministry of Agriculture. On the Nordic level, we have initiatives the EU is working, but there are also global initiatives like the Core Carbon Principles or the so-called VCMI, which is looking at the climate claims that corporates can make. So really finding out what will be the main kind of guidance and the main policy is crucial. So now to the soil carbon and how this what is the role of soil carbon in the voluntary market? I think the rigor aspect has probably been discussed already here in the past presentations quite a lot. Additionality, I think, is really crucial here as well, because we need to consider that transferring to perhaps a more regenerative form of agriculture is not something that's additional forever, but it's more like you would be supporting a transformation that takes place over a few years. So you need to consider is creating carbon credits, is paying for them additional anymore in 5 years' time when it becomes more like business as usual. Permanence, obviously, that's the big challenge here. When you have more permanent solutions to carbon removal, how does soil carbon compete there? With geological storage, for example. And the double claiming issue relates to, especially in the EU, the host country of the project that creates these credits already accounts for those credits in its national carbon accounting schemes as part of the EU, as part of the signatory to the Paris Agreement. So we need a solution there, and one of them is to adjust the claim that you make. So the corporate, instead of making a carbon neutrality claim, they claim more like climate action, for example, that we have supported climate action. Let's say if it's a project in Finland, you could say that we have supported Finland in achieving its climate targets. However, it remains to be seen if this is an attractive claim for buyers to make. We have no idea yet. Right now, the main claims, like double counting, prevents you making a carbon neutrality or net zero claim, and those are the main drivers in the voluntary market right now. If we don't solve this claiming issue, it might be a big stopper in the market. Last thing I'm going to say is that we're going to publish tomorrow, Compensate Foundation, a white paper on these so-called non-offsetting claims. So please make sure to have a look at that, and it'll provide more insight on what these actually mean and what are the pros and cons with them. But I'm happy to answer any questions if you have. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niklas. That was like a really valuable contribution to this session and the whole theme. So thanks indeed. Any questions or comments to Niklas over there, please?
I'm Frank Bundgaard from Denmark, SEGES, and we are working with this rewetting of organic soils. And I will ask you how you think we should handle that. We have the discussion in Denmark, we have not solved it yet, that the EU or the national money fund the rewetting of the agricultural land. We have one-time compensation and free land consolidation. But the discussion is who owns the climate credits. At the moment, if the farmers in Denmark go into this project, they can't. They don't have the climate credits. And I think that's a lot of projects in Denmark are funded by EU money. So how do we look at that?
Yeah, so that's a question of policy additionality, or also, I think, to some extent, financial additionality. So if the private sector, if corporates want to buy carbon credits, they want to make sure that they're additional. But if that action is already supported by public funding, for example, or public policies, then it's not additional anymore. So you would be paying for something that is already being paid for by the government or the EU or something. So they're not very attractive as carbon credits for the voluntary market in that case. And I think you were also maybe referring to the double claiming issue, where country of Denmark, the government of Denmark, also claims those credits in its national carbon inventory, which means that if those are sold also to the voluntary market buyer cannot make, for example, a carbon neutrality or a net zero claim. But what they can say is technically that they are supporting Denmark's climate goals under the Paris Agreement, for example, or as a member of the EU. And that remains to be seen if that's an attractive claim for companies to make. I don't know. It might be, but we don't know yet.
Let's take another one still.
Thank you. Ivo Degen, Climate Farmers. I'm curious, I have a ton of questions, but because we've been discussing the issues around carbon credits and agriculture for a long time, if we take durability, for example, when it comes to durability, nature-based solutions will always be outperformed by industrial solutions. Yet we do not want to exclude nature-based solutions. What are your top 3 favorite solutions to this problem?
You have some time to think of the answer when the microphone arrives.
Really good question. I'm a big supporter of nature-based solutions, but only if all parties and stakeholders understand the uncertainties involved with them. So both the seller of the credit has to be very transparent about the low permanence, for example, and the buyer has to understand what that actually means. So, for example, making a carbon neutrality claim today with very low permanence credits, I don't think it's credible. There are ton-year accounting might be one solution, but I'm not sure if it's the right one. But perhaps kind of adjusting the claim a bit and transparency, I think, are my key messages there, because there's also a big biodiversity or nature asset market being formed right now, where it's not so much about the exact tonnage, this and this much tons of CO2. It's more like, okay, we're storing those peatlands, for example, by re-wetting them. We can still quantify the climate impact if we want to, and we can measure them and all that. But if the buyer or the payer of that says that we're restoring nature and not saying that we're offsetting an exact amount of CO2, that allows perhaps a bit more room for nature-based solutions. But it doesn't mean that the project shouldn't be additional, shouldn't be rigorous, shouldn't be good quality. So adjusting the claim is not an excuse to let down on quality. It's more like you sort of you don't make an equivalency between emissions and the climate action to such a strict meaning where, for example, when carbon neutrality claims are made.
Werner, do you have a short question? No. Okay. Then I'm afraid that we have to leave that maybe later for the plenary session. Maybe I'm sorry, but time's running. Yeah. Okay. Don't forget. Okay. Okay. I'm glad that you were so honest. So thanks Werner for that. But especially thanks Niklas for. Okay. Well. All right. Maybe I already promised that. So one more, and it needs to be short. Go ahead, please.
Thank you very much. Fantastic, really, really interesting stuff. It is a short question. You may not have the answer to it. So we're here kind of wondering how to change farmers' land management practices so that all of this offsetting can happen, basically. Are you seeing, and this is now a lot of work going into making this happen. Are you, within your broader carbon markets experience, seeing a similar amount of work going on to pressuring the corporates not to emit?
Increasingly so. Maybe not so 3-4 years ago, where offsets were perhaps the easy way out for a lot of corporates. But I mentioned the Science-Based Targets Initiative, for example, which requires if you want to achieve net zero, you need deep decarbonization throughout scopes 1, 2, and 3. So all throughout your value chain, up to 95%, 90 to 95% in comparison to a baseline year. I think that's not an easy task to achieve. Are corporate actually living up to their promises? No, definitely not. But they've set the targets at least, and now it's up to scrutiny and And also the Green Claims Initiative, like if you make these claims, you need to kind of justify how you're going to reach them, and you need transparency around them. So I think here we've gone, like the carbon markets have gone a lot forward, where this mitigation hierarchy of first minimizing emissions, avoiding them, and only then offsetting has really become to take, like offsetting is being put into the right corner as the last kind of solution. But recognizing the amount of carbon removals we need, we shouldn't completely forget about that as well. And that's why I think like the offset market or the carbon market really needs to shift towards removals, away from the avoidance projects, because avoidance is what companies need to do already as a means of like as reducing their own emissions or also their Scope 3 emissions. So the carbon market, I think, should focus exclusively on removals in the future.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks, Niklas, once again. Thanks indeed. Yeah, I acknowledge that we are running a little bit late, but I mean, still, this is we are getting so many like different viewpoints to this problem, and it's not so often that we get a chance to discuss at this level. So I think this is worth it. So we only stealing time from our coffee break, but I hope that you don't mind. Next, we will add still another kind of aspect to this theme. And can you put the slide on, please? Yeah, it's like there's like a change in the name of or who's giving the presentation. So we have Hilkka Heiskari-Tuohiniemi from Vaisala company, and the new aspect that will be added here is that we've heard that the different kind of measurement technologies are needed in this modern and tomorrow's MRV systems, and now we will hear somebody needs to prepare those technologies and those measurement and monitoring equipment from that, and now we'll hear from Vaisala company's perspective on what they think about that. So the title is Sensing Technology Company Perspective, exactly. So Hilkka, you're warmly welcome, of course, and the floor is yours now. Please.
Thank you, Jari. So I work for Vaisala. Vaisala headquarters is in Finland. We are about 500 million turnover company, and we spent last year 60 million euros on our research and development. We have a science team, but we basically make all kind of weather observation products, starting from radio sondes to weather radars, and we ship tens of thousands of weather stations each year. And half of our company revenue now comes from monitoring industrial processes. So we know quite well what's happening in the industry also. And I have worked for the company 10 years, and in the last 3 years' time we had a very nice collaboration program with Helsinki University and the Finnish Meteorological Institute about carbon fluxes and carbon flux monitoring. Also, as a company, we have had carbon dioxide probes for almost 50 years' time, mainly in industrial processes, but also in atmospheric amounts. And we also look at all the greenhouse gases, so methane and nitrous oxide would be of interest in future also. Thanks to science, we know that the climate change is happening. We know, or we can estimate what's the impact of it. Out of the all greenhouse gases, is the top one the pointer? Oh, yeah, okay. So out of all the greenhouse gases, carbon dioxide has the biggest impact, and it's also the most long-lasting one. Then we have methane, the red one, and then the nitrous oxide, the yellow one. So that's why especially the carbon dioxide is of interest. And the climate change has had a significant impact on Earth and continues to do so despite all reduction actions for the next 100 years. We all know what needs to be done. We need to decarbonize. global emissions in carbon dioxide equivalent in 2019 were almost 60 gigatons a year, and we need to reduce it significantly. The biggest reduction activities come from heavy industries, so decarbonizing steel, aluminium, cement production, and also paper and pulp industry. And then there's a huge transitioning happening now from fossil fuels to green energy and electrification of everything. So the industry is doing a lot and very fast pace. When we look at the carbon fluxes and what's happening on Earth, we have a quite nice global network, ICOS and the American equivalent, AmeriFlux, and also there are other continental and regional flux stations. At the global, we know quite well, how do I use this here? Our total emissions are about 40 gigatons a year, and about half of that is synced back to Earth through carbon cycle. And about 20 gigatons a year is getting into atmosphere in the growth. In the heavy industry and in the fossil fuels, the uncertainty is quite low, is about 5%, whereas in the land use, although it's smaller in size, the uncertainty is much higher. And then the natural sinks have also very high uncertainty. And this is the reason we need to measure them more and have more observation stations around the Earth, both at the ground level and satellite level. There are technologies available. They are different. And I'm not saying that any one of these is better than another one. We have studied this quite a lot, discussed with different customers, and we probably need all of these measures. We need eddy covariance stations. They measure fluxes over larger areas. So far they are quite complex and costly to operate. We need soil sampling, but they give, you need a lot of samples, and then if you want to monitor the soil carbon, you typically have to wait maybe for 5 years before you see a change in the soil samples. So it takes a long time to detect very minor changes. Chamber measurements are maybe quite easy to deploy and fast, but they also represent a very small area and not so well the whole field. And if you utilize them continuously, they also have an impact on the area that they are measuring, because it's kind of small greenhouse chamber, so you need to move them around. Satellites are very attractive, but as was mentioned earlier today, it's always behind the corner. And now we can combine satellite data, but we still would need quite dense ground observation network. We know that the carbon trading mechanisms can work quite well, especially the European emission trading system has been very efficient. The prices are quite high, about 82 euros, $95, and there are other continental and regional emission trading systems in place, and in all of them the carbon trading prices are getting higher. So we have evidence that this as a system and mechanism can work. So what is missing now? The trading systems, carbon taxes and emission trading systems are covering just part of the world. If you look at North America, USA is not in. Europe is quite well covered, but there are vast areas or continents that haven't put any system in place yet. So the systems or emission trading systems and carbon taxes are not fully integrated, and they are not yet mandatory all over. And also there are differences which industries are in different regions. And Europe has been quite advanced. So maybe our message as weather observation technology provider is that we have technologies in place. They need to improve, but they are available and they are already accurate enough. We have scientific know-how, and of course science continues and we understand more of Earth phenomena. But our message is that we would like market mechanisms, regulations and incentives to develop more, because only about 20% of global emissions are now covered by emission trading systems. So there is a huge potential and upside in the emission trading systems or incentives, also for the natural sinks. Thank you.
Thank you, Hilkka. Thank you very much. And I think yet another aspect to look at that, how, what affects the technology companies' possibilities to contribute to the market and stuff like that. So yeah, thanks a lot. Any questions to Hilkka? I would like to ask one. So,
Okay.
I mean, it's related to this, is that of course, kind of the development of the policies and especially kind of these, how the effectiveness of policies is monitored and things like that, requires this kind of measurement equipment, and also how to develop these kind of different policies. Then on the other hand, what you're saying and what your message is that you need these kind of mechanisms already in place in order there to be the market for the technologies, solutions that you're developing. So it's a kind of a, that kind of a problem of which how these could be then developed. How do you see the situation? Is that somehow slowing down the development of the policies and the kind of the technological, how different technologies, how advanced technologies are applied in the policies? Do you understand my question? Is that which needs to come first?
Maybe I open it a little bit up for the audience. So our company developed prototypes for carbon flux measuring, and in practice, our challenge is that it is technically possible. Our prototypes operated very well on the field tests, but the market is not big enough. So for our company, we still need to be profitable. There is a rather large scientific market, which is already shared by mainly 2 competitors. And having an entry there is possible, but it takes a very long time. So we are looking at this voluntary carbon market to grow, as Niklas presented earlier. Or we are waiting that there is like more areas coming under regulation so that it would make business. Then the greenhouse gas production of greenhouse gas monitoring products can be made in volumes, and then the prices will drop. Now the volumes are small, prices are high, so there is no regulation. So yes, it is a vicious circle we are in now. But luckily, all the trends show that the greenhouse gas monitoring will continue and increase. So we are monitoring for the market to open.
Yeah, thank you very much. So again, Eric Sechev from INRAE. We just wanted to do an update because maybe people in the assistance are not very familiar to that, but it was said this morning and also by you now that about remote sensing, it has been there for a while and discussing and all operational that could be used. Maybe people are not aware, but now the CAP monitoring is based on remote sensing, on Sentinel-1, Sentinel-2 data, and those data, they are used in operational mode, like with tools like the Sen4CAP, for operationally monitoring management practices, like cover crops, tillage, and so on. And also there are some tools where we are presenting the agri-carbon processing chain that is using those remote sensing data for operational data assimilation in dedicated crop model for MRV. So it means that we are entering in a new era. Now it's operational, and but maybe what people do not pay enough attention is that if you want to use those data, you really need some dedicated assimilation methods. So you can apply that at large scale, high resolution, what we need for MRV, and that requires some dedicated methodologies that can be a bit advanced in order to make the system really operational. I mean, basic assimilation methods like simplex methods, for instance, in classical crop model, that won't work because computation time would increase tremendously. So you need really to have dedicated methodologies to use those kind of data in a professional way for MRV.
Did you want to comment, or was it a viewpoint? Yes, good. Yes, good. Thank you. Yeah. Do you, Jari, want to comment on that?
Well, just saying, I mean, if I understood like the core of what you were commenting, that's a fair point, that in addition to that technologies become available, we need to develop the capabilities of using the data that these technologies develop. And I think, I think you mentioned that in the beginning of your presentation, like it's development of the segment in addition to the development of the capabilities of using them. Right?
Yes, and we see that all of these will be needed. And okay, now the grid is not very dense. The more we do this, the better the grid will be, and closer monitoring we will get. Many farmers have said that even like each field is different. And now they get some figure for the whole farm, which is not fair. Whether we ever get to field-based estimate, it might take a long time. Now farms are evaluated as one unity.
Yeah. Well, I think now we need to move on. Hilkka, thank you very much for bringing these insights. And if something is that these are it's this collaboration with the technology companies. I think they're the really important stakeholders here when we are developing these methodologies. So next presentation will be given by Juuso Joona, who's a farmer from Tyynelä farm and a board member of the Baltic Sea Action Group. So we'll deal with the farmer's perspective. So Juuso, go ahead.
Thank you. I will give you a farmer's perspective, maybe a cultivated farmer's perspective. I'm a farmer agronomist and educator, also working in a carbon action project, and we are farming our 140-hectare family farm in Joutseno, southeast Finland, 3 hours from this point. We are farming regeneratively and in certified organic production with a diverse crop rotation in its core, trying to maximize photosynthesization and microbial life and soil cover. We are developing and researching regenerative farming methods such as minimized tillage and collaborating with several research projects. Currently, 3 of them is going on a farm scale. Next week will be full of sampling on these trial plots. First, I would like to point out a couple of questions that defines the requirements for the MRV system. especially the last one is crucial from the farmer's point of view. Who owns the data and who can use that data that is collected? As we have heard today, it's a huge amount of data that is collected from the farmers and from the farms and farming operations to monitor soil carbon. So could it be in future that this data is available, for example, for commodity markets, for agri-tech providers or other agribusiness actors who may not be sharing the same targets with the farmers? This is what I'm thinking of, and this is something to consider in this development. Farmer needs a lot of data to support his or her decision making, and this sets the requirements for the system. The data and the system should be easily accessible, for example, through the smartphone interface. If it's only available through internet-based laptop interface, it might be one step too far from the tractor cabin or from the field where the operation and the decisions are made. The data should be reliable, and it should present what farmer observes in the field. And like we just heard, what farmer actually observes in the field is variation. There could be huge spatial variation in one field plot and in soil even in 1 square meter. Here's a picture of what happened? Better not to touch. Of one of our fields. It's a yield map, and we see that there's a huge variation in different parts of the field. This is 10-hectare field, and the green means high yield and red low in some range. And actually it follows quite nicely the contours. But if farmer is given one number, one average of yield or soil carbon stock or zinc based on this kind of data, it doesn't tell much, or it's not very reliable. I want to see more precise information like this one, and that is something to use for decision making and trying to improve soil health and yield in these red spots. Actually, that's quite. We have much bigger variation in some fields. Here, it's quite natural that the red areas are next to the forest and in the headline in the top corner. The data and system should be simple but not too limited. At least I would like to see the background data and the limitations available for advanced users, for advisors, and for developers. And this is also the question of reliability. This modeling systems needs a lot of input from the farmer as well. The farming operations, all the input. We heard earlier that one example that all the data from the farming operations is collected remotely, but it's still lacking, for example, inputs used, fertilizers, soil amendments, or such stuff. Farmers are having their bookkeeping from the farming operations, and it takes a lot of effort to put this data to a second system. So it really should be connected with bookkeeping and interfaces so that it doesn't take any extra manual work. Second, to maximize the use for the farmer, I think that the carbon modeling should include the crucial agronomic parameters such as water balance, nutrient balance, soil structure and texture. So to meet real life situation in the field. Because these are often those factors that are limiting the crop growth, microbial life, and also carbon sequestration. And if these are integrated in the system, it could be really useful for the farmer to use in decision making. Farmer is typically planning farming operations several years ahead based on crop rotation, which may vary from 3 to 7 years, for example. So to have forecast or estimate about the carbon balance, especially if it's monetized, it would be a really valuable parameter. Here we have an example from the quite recent data from the last week from the Quidja Edi governance site, where there is this forecast on the right-hand side, and it's increasing because of the warming weather, and it follows really nicely actually then the results. But the immediate need, until we have these developed MRV systems that we heard today in use, at least agricultural administration, that I'm happy to notice here in the audience, may ask for more simple and robust solutions to incentivize soil carbon sequestration. Then more actually practice-based solution could be useful, for example, based on vegetation cover. But nevertheless, this should also be result-based and need therefore monitoring, and most likely based on satellite imagery and other remote sensing. This is example from our farm from the October a couple of years ago. It's a Sentinel-2 satellite imagery NDVI data where we can really visibly see the differences among different crops. I have to mention that this bare soil is of course from our neighbor. We have full crop cover made with winter crops and perennial leys, and a lot of forest as well. Thank you for your attention, and happy to hear any questions or comments.
Yeah, thank you, Juuso. And there's at least one question over there. So.
Thank you. So it was really great to see the perspective of the farmer, as you said, represented. Could you say a little bit more about what kind of efforts are already in place to represent the farmer perspective, the voice of farmers as a collective in these conversations about monitoring, as there is so much investment happening in this space, both from private companies and from the European Commission? What are the spaces in which farmers are able to influence these conversations? And if they don't exist, how can we create?
Well, I'm not sure if I'm the right farmer representative in this question, because I guess this issue goes much over the head of most of the farmers. So they are very complicated. Of course, I'm including several projects of this topic and working through Carbon Action, BSAG. Last couple of months, I've been communicating with MEPs and the EU civil servants about this framework Christian just presented. So it takes more information. Of course, we are using our carbon pilot farmer network in Carbon Action, there is some who are interested in following this issue, but they are not that simple. I mean, every farmer cannot just say nothing about it, maybe about the principles, and that may be the level of communication that we set out the principles of this. For example, who owns the data, what are the requirements for the MRV system, and then the details would be communicated and developed with the experts.
So you said like multi-year forecasts would be useful for are you suggesting that you would submit a cultivation plan and you would get a result, or do you want to run what-if scenarios? Do you know exactly how much fertilizer you will be applying in the next 7 years, for example? I'm not a farmer, so.
Good point. If I think the interface and system, how it should go, now we have several farm bookkeeping programs. There is at least 4 I know, and I do have my own Excel platform, and Tuomas Mattila has his own, so that's the case. There are reasons. And Istem have developed one in FMI for use of carbon action. As it's best, there would be one for the bookkeeping, one for the subsidy applications, and one that is utilized also for the markets. And many farmers are having their cultivation planning in these bookkeeping and planning programs. There is nothing that is demanded for the subsidies currently. Maybe something's coming. But then this one interface, one program could deliver the forecast for the carbon balance, also maybe the economic assessment or several issues. So what I look for really is one system, or then there is systems, but they are very well connected and communicating with each other. There are no barriers between interfaces, and they have the same language. This is something that helps. And now even the markets may have their own, agri-tech providers have their own systems. And this is really spread it. And I think it doesn't serve no one.
Juuso, I think we need to move on now just to give. So Juuso, thanks once again for giving the farmer's perspective. So thanks indeed. Yeah. So we have one more presentation in this session. Ruysschaert. Close enough? Okay, thank you very much. A senior researcher on sustainable management from ILVA Flanders Research Institute for Agriculture, Fisheries and Food. So she's going to tell us about the Marvik activity towards a framework for design of the context-specific MRV systems for carbon farming. Welcome, the floor is yours.
Hello, good afternoon. We're nearly there for the coffee break, but I found it already very interesting discussions ongoing. So I hope this presentation will also contribute to that. So indeed, I'm Ruysschaert. I'm from Belgium, from ILVO, and I'm asked here as a coordinator of the Marvik project. And the Marvik project was one of the projects funded by the Soil Mission in support of the carbon removal certification regulation. Okay, so what we want to do in the projects is actually to develop and test a framework for the development of harmonized monitoring, reporting and verification systems. We are a project that has just started this month, and it will continue for 4 years, and we will focus on 4 land use types, all of agricultural nature, so arable land, grasslands, managed peatlands, and agroforestry and woody crops systems. We have a very nice consortium, I think. We are 16 partners from 12 countries, and we are also very happy that FMI is included, and we've already seen today and also yesterday that they're doing great work with modeling, with the field observatory, and also with connecting with all these farmers. So our beginning of the project was also this idea that was presented already this morning by Piet Smit himself, so I also don't have to explain this. So it means that indeed we also believe that there are many building blocks of an MRV system, and the challenge is how to connect them all together in a way that it becomes both accurate but also user-friendly for the farmers, so with low administrative burden. So the question is, and a big challenge also for the project is, how to make this work in practice in Europe. And in the title you have seen that we will make a framework for the design of context-specific MRV systems. And why do we want to make it context-specific? And I think this is a nice illustration, because the beauty of Europe, I think, is also in its diversity, right? So we have a huge diverse landscape, and also in farming. So we have a high diversity of pedoclimatic conditions, but also of farming types. So there is, for instance, the carbon farming practices, the carbon farming systems that are applied and are feasible, but there are also large differences in field size, farm size, the technological levels of the farms. So that is also very important to consider. We also think that there are differences between the scheme purposes. For instance, we are talking about the inventories for the LULUCF, but also the CAP, the private markets, the insetting. So they all require maybe a different geographical coverage and also maybe a different level of accuracy. And the next one is also very related to the discussion that we had just before this presentation. It's about the data availability. It's about the connection or the possibilities of connecting farm data to a system. And then that's not all in Europe. These possibilities are very different from one country to another. It's also about availability of sites. Here we have 100 farms that are already connected. So we call this level 2 sites, I would say. It's about, is there a carbon monitoring system in place? It's what I would call the level 1. Do we have an on-farm monitoring network, so the level 2? And do we have ICOS sites, the level 3? So are these available in a certain area to calibrate and improve the models, for instance? And also the degree of digital data availability. So in some countries, there is already a lot of digital data. Think of soil maps, but also the data from the CAP, like the land parcel identification system. And then, of course, the local policies. We had the European policies, but also there is quite a difference between the agricultural and the environmental local policies. And also very pleased that the previous speaker have been talking about the needs of the farmers and user preferences, and I think we should certainly not forget this. So what will be our approach? Our approach will be to talk about and have a common understanding about the rules and the guiding principles, and of course there is a lot ongoing for the carbon removal certification regulation at the moment, so we will certainly align with this. And then the main thing is that we will work on these different building blocks that was shown also by Piet Smit today. So it's about the building blocks of the data. What can we do with these benchmark sites? What are the different sampling strategies? How can we use the remote sensing? And how can we connect with the farm data? We want to improve the models, so see what are the different modeling approaches that we can use. And we want to make sure that we can connect all these building blocks into operational processing chains. And we already seen this morning, for instance, in the consortium also. There are different experiences and work being done already. For instance, by FMI, but also by INRAE or in Italy, for instance. So we will draw from this experience and see how to improve it and what will work in what context. Very important is also the accuracy of the different components, but also what is the accuracy if we put everything together, and also the cost. So the balance between cost and accuracy is also very important. And yeah, not to forget the user preference, of course. So at the end, we want to come up with a framework with a kind of decision trees where users who develop these MRV systems can have a look like what decisions to take when developing such a system, and what are the best choices to make in what context. To make it harmonized, we will work on guidelines, for instance, for sampling benchmark sites, for instance, guidelines for calculating costs and accuracies, and we will also work on some tools like for soil sampling. We will test this framework in the countries that are participating in the project, and we will try to improve this approach then. For supporting the right choices, we will also work on the mitigation potential. So where do we have what potential for mitigating, but also on the impact of climate change. We think it's very important to also take this into account, as well as socioeconomic potential, like the cost effectiveness, as I've already mentioned. And also we will think about the right policy instruments. So to conclude, we will work towards something that can be used by any public or private carbon farming scheme developer to have a standardized approach for designing MRV systems that are in line, of course, with the EC regulatory framework, that have a good balance between cost and accuracy, that consider non-permanence, for instance, by climate change, that allow different levels of complexity depending on the conditions, that are attractive to land managers, that is as open source as possible, and that also allows post-project improvement of the methodology, because new practices will be established. We know that there will be new technologies popping up and so on. And last but not least, I think there are many things ongoing. We have heard many presentations, and also at the European level, there are different soil mission projects. We have the expert group of carbon removals. We have the European Observatory and many other European projects. So it's not only the challenge to get the project ongoing, but we're also looking forward to connect with these other initiatives, because I think we've all seen there are many challenges, and it's only by working together probably that we will come to the right thing that we want to all to achieve. Thank you very much. I forgot this last slide. So these are our work package leaders and the persons responsible for the different land uses. I also want to highlight, please connect with us, but there are also several people in the audience, Andrea Ferrarini, Erik Sesha, Lisa and her team of FMI, and Suzanne Reinder, so you can all contact us and have a talk during the coffee break.
Yeah. Thank you, Greg. Thanks indeed. And then you mentioned that collaborations are important, so that's a proof of that, a large group of people and institutes there. So yeah, thanks very much for the very interesting example of MRV system. So any questions to Greg? There's one.
Thank you very much for the presentation. My name is Ivana. I work at Aarhus University, and I see that it's one of the partners in the project. I'm outsider to the field, so no critical questions on content, but more a question on how do you ensure that the tool that you are developing, the framework that you're developing, is really going to be accepted and will be used by the users that you have planned for. I mean, you have the research project, but then how do you know that this will happen, or are they already part of the project in some manner? I think this is frequently questioned in many research fields. So maybe here we had the governance EC point of view this morning, or also in the afternoon. What is your viewpoint, how easy or difficult this will be? Thank you.
Yeah, good question. Thank you. So I think we still have to develop the more precise plan, but we plan also to have a kind of end user fora, organize some webinars also. And then I think it's also about just making the connections between talking with each other and trying to see how we can all help each other to move forward. And of course we will reach out with what we produce and to see, to inform and to get feedback from others. But if you have any suggestion, I'm happy to talk further with you. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. I think it's time to close this session now. So thank you once again, Greet. Excellent. Thanks a lot. And thank you all of the speakers of this afternoon. I think this was a really excellent collection of diverse viewpoints to this topic. And then, so what we will, and thanks to all of you who came and participated in the session. So thanks indeed. I think this was really interesting. And what will happen now is that it's a coffee break time, and then we will continue at 1:30. So 3:30 in the plenary in the main conference room. So let's see you all there in 45 minutes. Thank you.